As was explained, although not directly stated in the last section of the presentation, a profound aspect of our reality is that there is a reversal between what we intuitively expect should occur within the highest level of brain function, versus what we expect should occur within the lowest level of it. Just about everything within the universe, apart from how our reality is created, works in such a way, so that as something has achieved more complexity from evolving into a higher level of order, it is able to function in more complex ways. For example, it seems intuitive that since the molecular and the cellular levels of our brain are of the highest level of its evolutionary process, it would be likely that consciousness would be created within these levels of order, while the quantum and subquantum levels, being the most elementary levels of order, should function simply as the most elementary building blocks of our brain. But, to the contrary, the reillusion hypothesis proposes that the physics of our reality reverses this logic, as the QTF data state of a perspective that was processed within the cellular levels of our brain is utilized within the subquantum level at the beginning of the Sumber conversion, and processes it into the electromagnetic quantum data state to initiate the creation of an observer's consciousness and their conscious perspective. The reason that our reality is created in this way is that the evolution of everything in the universe emerges from within the embodiment of QTF code and data. Thus, the highest level of order that the inanimate objects in the universe have evolved into, as well as the highest level of order that has evolved in conscious, living beings, is all fundamentally the product of what has been coded to occur within the embodiment of QTF code and data, from within the subquantum level of order. Everything that there is to know about the universe and the creation of our reality is contained within the QTF data state. This likely involves physics that we will not come to understand for many years. Even though the QTF perspectives that are gathered by our five senses, along with the products of some of the other higher brain functions, create consciousness, they do so from within the quantum level of order within the physics of the Standard Model, and not within the cellular, molecular, or the atomic levels of our brain. Therefore, consciousness cannot be created within the cellular level of our brain, because the cellular, molecular, and the atomic levels of our brain function within the QTF data state. This is to be differentiated from a perspective that got processed within the higher levels of brain function, to be merged with the pre-electrons from within the pre-quantum level of our brain, to form the electromagnetic quantum data state of the perspective. The lower half of this visual aid depicts the superstrings, a human brain, a picture that represents the landscape of a perspective, along with waves of electromagnetic radiation that are emanating from the perspective, and that are received by three of the observer's five senses. Everything in the lower half of the visual aid is in black and white, to represent that it exists within the embodiment of QTF code and data, rather than being simulated into what the picture depicts. The universe has no physical expression within the QTF data state. Something that exists as QTF code and data will emerge with an expression if an observer from within their conscious reality interacts with it, causing the next Planck scale moment of the perspective from within the QTF data state to be converted into the electromagnetic quantum data state, which will then be simulated into the observer's consciousness to become the observer's conscious perspective within the next Planck scale moment. Before continuing, a more in-depth explanation of the process that allows us to act with free will within a universe where everything that we perceive happens within the QTF data state before it gets simulated within our reality will be reviewed. That which we do within our simulated reality controls what we will do within the next moment of our reality, even though it must occur within the QTF data state prior to occurring within our reality. As we do something and consciously perceive what we are doing from within our reality, as well as consciously perceive the landscape of the present moment, the physics within the animate space-time continuum has created the frames within the QTF data state for all the possible actions that we could do in the next Planck scale moment. Since the physics of the animate space-time continuum creates sequential frames within the QTF datastate at the rate of many quadrillions per each second of our perspective, there is almost always only one next action that can occur within each interval of time that a frame is created. But, in those instances where we change an action in some way, there are only very few directions that we can go within a Planck scale interval of time. Within the physics of the animate space-time continuum, from within the lower levels of order, where consciousness exists within the most fundamental levels of the electromagnetic, quantum data state, and where it functions as code and data within a virtual-like process, rather than as conscious thought, it chooses which one of the very few possible next actions it will take. This is happening constantly, within the physics of our reality, and within intervals of time that are much too small for us to perceive or discover by using our present technologies. Therefore, when we change an action that is already in effect and continuing to occur within the inanimate physics of the universe, consciousness chooses which QTF frames will be processed within the Sumber conversion, just before the QTF data state of the action gets processed within the standard model of particle physics, followed by the physics within all the other branches of science, to be simulated into the next moment of our reality. In this manner, that which we do from within our reality, controls what we will do within the next moment of our reality, even though the action and the perspective must occur within the QTF data state before we do it, and perceive doing it. Remember, all that we are, exist as two separate components. One component is our physical essence, which like the rest of the universe, exists for the most part, within the QTF data state. The other component of what we are, exists within the large-scale level of our consciousness, which is created after conscious perspective, along with independent thought, that were initiated from within the standard model of particle physics, have been processed within the physics within all the other branches of science. From within our reality, the smallest interval of time that we can perceive and function within, consists of quadrillions of computations that are occurring within the animate space-time continuum, from within the pre-quantum and the quantum levels of order. Thus, our reality does not only involve a merger between the QTF data state and the electromagnetic, quantum data state, it also involves a merger between the subquantum and the quantum levels of order, with the large-scale level, which is created within our stream of consciousness. Since the reillusion hypothesis proposes that the universe and our reality are fundamentally the product of a complex system of code and data, we must realize that at its most fundamental level, consciousness and that which is simulated within it are created within computations that occur at an incredible speed, before they create our perspective. Planck time and Planck length exist as they are, because they are the intervals of time and volumes of space, that the inanimate space-time continuum functions. The visual aid also shows a computer cable connecting the superstring matrix to a human brain. This analogy demonstrates that everything in our reality, whether it is a reillusion, or it is being directly simulated into our consciousness from within the electromagnetic, quantum data state, at its most fundamental level, exists within the embodiment of code and data, even as we consciously perceive it from within our reality. All the steps that are shown in the visual aid are occurring solely within the embodiment of one or the other type of data state, so that even as we perceive each moment of reality, that which we perceive remains as a virtual-like phenomenon that was created within a process that can be compared to a computer program that is created within another program, except that the physics of how this is accomplished surpasses our present knowledge and even our ability to fully comprehend it. Therefore, our physical essence and all that we perceive initially existed within the embodiment of QTF code and data that originated from within the superstrings, while the most elementary level of our consciousness accesses the QTF data state and converts it into the electromagnetic, quantum data state as a function of that which we directly interact with. That which is coded to be, from within the QTF data state, functions as if it had gone through the standard model of particle physics and the physics within all the other branches of science, without actually doing so. In other words, its code causes that, which is coded to be, to function as if it had gone through the inanimate physics of the universe, so that if, and when it becomes part of an observer's reality, it will behave within the observer's perspective, as if it had existed and functioned within all the physics of the universe, from the past to the present, as the past and the present only exist within the observer's perspective. Thus, the only difference between what happens within the QTF data state that no one perceives, from that which occurs within the electromagnetic, quantum data state, is that the QTF data state of a perspective that is not perceived by a conscious sentient being, is missing the pre-electrons, which create a true positive and negative electromagnetic charge, that is required for consciousness to be initiated within the standard model of particle physics, and for reality to be simulated within an observer's mind. Thus, the universe ages, evolves, and functions within the animate physics of the universe, which includes all the branches of science, within a virtual manner, without consciousness being formed. It should be noted that, by not allowing consciousness to be created within the QTF data state, most of an observer's reality can exist as reillusions, while only a small fraction of it needs to be simulated. It also allows conscious sentient beings like us and the animals that share the earth with us, to function with free will. Tiny bits of QTF code, called pre-electrons, are added to the QTF data state of a perspective, from within the subquantum level of an observer's brain, after the observer's brain processes the information that it received from one or more of his, or her 5 senses within the embodiment of QTF data, by using the cellular, the molecular, and the atomic levels of their brain. This all occurs within the embodiment of QTF code and data, for at this stage within the reillusion process, the observer, the waves of electromagnetic radiation, and the landscape that they are observing, has no expression. It's all just QTF code and data. As the QTF data state of a perspective exists within an observer's mind, prior to being merged with the pre-electrons, it is referred to as the first state of an observer's reality. When the pre-electrons are added to the QTF data state of a perspective from within the subquantum level of an observer's mind, it converts the QTF data state of the quantum particles that make up the perspective, into the electromagnetic, quantum data state. The electromagnetic, quantum data state has true electromagnetic properties, and the electromagnetic properties are what allows the standard model of particle physics to initiate the creation of consciousness, along with the simulation of the perspective within the observer's stream of consciousness. After the pre-electrons are added to the QTF data state of a perspective from within an observer's mind, and as a perspective is being processed within the physics of the standard model, consciousness exists in its most elementary state of being, prior to reaching the level of conscious thought. It is at this level within the reillusion process, that consciousness controls what we will do within the next moment, by controlling, which frames will be utilized to create our action within the next moment so that we can act with free will. This is called the second state of reality, which exists within the embodiment of the animate space-time continuum, and when consciousness functions as code and data, rather than thought and sentient perspective. It is at this level that consciousness and the virtual nature of our reality interact together within the embodiment of code and data. The third state of reality is our stream of consciousness, as we perceive our reality within the motion of time and in 3 spatial dimensions. In the book, The 4 States of Reality, there is a reference to a part of our mind called the psychic component. The Sumber conversion is described as occurring within what is referred to as the psychic component of an observer's mind, and those perspectives that have been converted into the electromagnetic, quantum data state within the Sumber conversion, are copied and stored in another dimensionality, besides going on to create our conscious perspective within the reillusion process. This other dimensionality is part of the 4th state of reality, and that, which it represents has been conceptualized, as the other side, by many philosophers and some theologians. The universe will age and evolve within the QTF data state, just as it would if the entire universe was simulated within the electromagnetic, quantum data state. This reveals that in actuality, the universe only ages and evolves within the QTF data state, For each moment of a simulated perspective from within the electromagnetic, quantum data state, is an exact copy of the same moment from within the QTF data state, with the exception of true electromagnetic properties having been added to create the electromagnetic, quantum data state, allowing it to become simulated within an observer's consciousness, and given a three-dimensional, temporal property. Aside from this, our reality only exists within the present moment. Thus, the universe only ages and evolves within the QTF data state, but aging within the QTF data state does not involve the motion of time. This reveals that the aging process that occurs to matter, from one moment to the next moment, is part of the code within the QTF data state, even though the QTF data state has no motion of time occurring within it. Add to this, that the motion of time only occurs within our simulated, conscious reality, which only exists within the present moment. It becomes easier to understand why quantum particles exhibit such bizarre behaviors from within our perspective. This visual aid depicts electromagnetic energy that is emanating from a picture that represents the landscape of an observer's perspective, being processed within an observer's ears, eyes, and by the sense of touch, depicting 3 of the 5 observer's senses. This all happens within the QTF data state of the perspective, a Planck scale moment prior to being converted into the electromagnetic, quantum data state of the perspective, to be simulated as the observer's reality. This visual aid uses different colors as a way to show that the superstrings exist and vibrate within many different subquantum dimensions. These dimensions have no relevance to our 3 large-scale spatial dimensions. Aside from the QTF data state being in color, the colors within the rest of the visual aid have no other meaning. The perspective that is being propagated within the electromagnetic waves includes visible light, sound, and a tactile sensation, such as temperature or wind, being gathered by 3 of the observer's senses. These perspectives are from within the QTF data state of the event, and are coded within the QTF data state, to be gathered by the observer's senses, via waves of electromagnetic radiation. The waves of electromagnetic radiation as well as the quantum wave function, only exist within the QTF data state, and never get simulated, for only the point particle expression of a photon creates a perspective, as its wave function collapses at the matter of an observer's sensing organ within the QTF data state of the event. Thus, waves of electromagnetic radiation and the quantum wave function are always a real illusion. This demonstrates that the QTF data state includes the code and data state for the electromagnetic wave expression of a photon's energy, the photon's quantum wave function, as well as the point particle expression of its energy. Once the wave of electromagnetic energy contacts the matter of the observer's sensing organ within the QTF data state of the event, the quantum wave function collapses into a photon, as a point particle. The collapse of the wave function always occurs within the QTF data state of an event, as the wave contacts any matter, whether the matter is an observer's sensing organ, or the matter of an inanimate object that is not being observed, and does not get simulated in anyone's reality. The point particle expression of a photon is what creates the energy within the nerve cell of the sensing organ, which then creates the QTF data state code for an electrochemical propagation of the information, through the neurons, and into the sensing centers of the observer's brain. All brain functions occur within the QTF data state of the event, within the embodiment of QTF code and data, before the QTF data state of the perspective gets converted into the electromagnetic, quantum data state of the perspective, within the subquantum level of the observer's brain, to be simulated within the observer's stream of consciousness. This demonstrates one example of how the QTF data state is coded to function within a virtual manner, as if it has electromagnetic properties, within all locations of the universe that no one is observing, as well as within a perspective that is being gathered by one or more of an observer's senses, but the QTF code has no actual electromagnetic properties. Thus, the collapse of the quantum wave function into a point particle is coded to occur throughout the universe within the QTF data state, even where no one is there to observe it. This is required for the universe to age and evolve in the absence of conscious observation, as well as having the universe always being in a constant state of readiness to be observed. Therefore, the aging process of the universe occurs solely within the QTF data state, and within the property of QTF code and data, while our reality only consists of each present moment of that, which had occurred within the QTF data state, as it is being simulated into our stream of consciousness. As aging occurs within the QTF data state, it does not occur within the passage of time, for time does not pass in the QTF data state. All events that happened billions of years in the past, as well as those that will happen billions of years in the future, exist together simultaneously within the QTF data state, with the exception of our actions and the effects that those actions will have in the future. Thus, the future of the entire universe was coded within one brief moment, from what we conceptualize as the beginning of the universe in the Big Bang. The past, the present and the future are only relevant from within our conscious perspective, and have no relevancy from within the QTF data state, somewhat analogous to the frames of a movie, as it sits on the shelf. Although time does not pass from the now to the then within the QTF data state, the information for the rate that time will pass within each location of the universe is coded within the QTF data state, but the motion of time from the now to then only exists within an observer's conscious perspective, and only the actions of an observer can alter that which had already been coded to occur within the QTF data state, as the action, along with the effect that the action will have in the future, will be edited into the QTF data state, so that it can be part of what had occurred within the universe, within all observers' realities. In accordance with the re-illusion hypothesis, unlike almost all other quantum particles, photons themselves never get simulated, even though photons are what creates our perspective of most re-illusions, by being the energy that initiates the electrochemical signal within one of our 5 sensing organs. Only the energy state of an atom, before a photon is absorbed, and then after it has been ejected from an electron, gets simulated within the electromagnetic, quantum data state, if the atom is directly interacted with, or to be perceived as a re-illusion. The information of a perspective that was gathered by the observer's 3 senses, that was part of the code from within the QTF data state of the event, gets sent to the observer's brain, where it is processed within the molecular and cellular levels of the brain, within the embodiment of QTF code and data. The molecular and cellular levels of an observer's brain, and all the processes that take place within it, are part of the code within the QTF data state, just as the rest of the universe is. The next step within the re-illusion process is the Sumber conversion. The Sumber conversion is the process that converts the QTF data state of the quantum particles that will form an observer's conscious perspective, into the electromagnetic, quantum data state, that will interact together within the electromagnetic spectrum of energy within the standard model of particle physics, and within the physics of all the other branches of science. Only the QTF data state of an event that was perceived by an observer and processed within the QTF data state of an observer's brain, will be merged with pre-electrons within the Sumber conversion, and only the point particle state of a photon and any other quantum particle will take part in forming the perspective. There is some undefined process or phenomenon that occurs within the pre-quantum level of an observer's brain that results in the merger of the QTF data state of a perspective with the pre-electrons. This does not happen to the QTF data state of an event that was not observed, for pre-electrons are only accessible from within the pre-quantum level of a conscious, sentient being's brain. As the Sumber conversion relates to creating the electromagnetic, quantum data state of a perspective, it begins within the pre-quantum level of an observer's brain, and ends in the creation of the quantum level of order. When the Sumber conversion adds pre-electrons to the QTF data state of an event that had already been processed through the large-scale level of an observer's brain, within the QTF data state of the event, the product is the electromagnetic, quantum data state of the perspective. All the quantum particles that scientists have identified to date are the products of the electromagnetic, quantum data state of a perspective, after being processed within the physics of the Standard Model and the physics within all the other branches of science. The reason why the entire QTF data state of the universe goes through the Sumber conversion, rather than just a perspective that was perceived by an observer, is that the Sumber conversion has other functions, aside from merging pre-electrons to the QTF data state of an observer's perspective. As explained in great detail in the book, via a different set of physics that does not involve pre-electrons, the Sumber conversion integrates the QTF data state of all matter and electromagnetic energy into the space-time of each location of the universe. Thus, the QTF data state of all matter and all electromagnetic radiation, within every location of the universe, must go through the Sumber conversion, so that it will be in phase with the space-time of the location that it is in, whether or not it becomes part of anyone's reality. This aspect of the Sumber conversion takes part in the ultra-small scale physics, of time dilation and spatial contraction, within the subquantum level of order. Once the electromagnetic, quantum data state gets processed through the Standard Model of particle physics, the perspective exists as functional quantum particles, that when processed through the physics within the other branches of science and then perceived within an observer's stream of consciousness, it creates the observer's reality, consisting of matter, space, gravity, energy, all functioning within the passing of time, that along with re-illusions, form the landscape of each moment of our reality. The book, The Four States of Reality, explains many more aspects of the re-illusion hypothesis and the two spectrums of energy hypothesis. This ends the presentation. If you would like to contact the author, please contact him at thefourstatesofreality@gmail.com.